Hey everyone, it's Joe Kral with the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to Pro-Life University. This week we're going to discuss something a little bit different. We're going to actually discuss a U.S. Supreme Court decision that just came down this past Monday, as a matter of fact. It's called Ramos versus Louisiana. And interestingly enough, this is a case that doesn't involve abortion litigation at all. It has nothing to do with the pro-life law or anything of the sort. But interestingly enough, it certainly opens the door for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Some of you may have seen, and this was highlighted in lifenews.com, two particular articles. One talking about Kavanaugh and how Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. And another one was Justice Clarence Thomas talking about Roe v. Wade being erroneous and so forth. And these articles are actually based upon this particular case. Now, I know not all of us out there are legal scholars. I'm certainly not a legal scholar myself. I dive into the realm of legal philosophy, not so much legalities themselves and jurisprudence and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, it is a rather intriguing case, and it certainly needs to be looked at. We ought to dive into it so you can get to know this decision a little bit more, become more familiar with it, and hopefully come out with a really positive attitude that this is really a good thing. The case obviously originates from Louisiana, and here in this particular case, what happens is a situation in which a man was convicted of a serious crime. The jury came back with a 10-2 decision, basically saying that he was convicted of the crime, and then he was given a life sentence. Well, basically, if you look at 48 other states, you have to have a unanimous decision, and he appealed that since, hey, look, this wasn't a unanimous decision, this violated my constitutional rights. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed with him, and they overturned a 1972 decision that allowed that Louisiana law to stay in place. So it's interesting, all right? So this gets into this issue, this particularly a legal principle that's called stare decisis. Let stand the decision, all right? Or let the decision stand. And basically, it's the idea that, we need to look at precedents, and precedents is very important. But this question certainly raises an important question. Is the legal principle of stare decisis, absolute? Right? Now, in a little bit, I'm going to talk about the moral issues surrounding stare decisis. Now, let me simply say this. The way the U.S. Supreme Court ruled was that stare decisis is not absolute because there are unjust decisions that are made. The Supreme Court recognized this. That's why they overturned the 1972 case. That's why we see in the opinion a mention of Roe v. Wade as being erroneously decided. That's a positive note if you haven't noticed yet, all right? So this is a good thing, right? But the basic gist of the decision is that stare decisis is not absolute. And the simple truth is that erroneous Supreme Court decisions, if they're so egregious in their error, not only should be overturned, but ought to be overturned. That the legal principle of stare decisis is, one, not absolute, and two, there's an obligation by the justices to actually overturn erroneous decisions that obviously took place in the past. So this is a good thing. Now, this certainly from a moral standpoint, all right, is very intriguing, all right? This gets into a long tradition, especially with the great Christian philosopher and the great Catholic philosopher, St. Thomas Aquinas, he has a whole treatise on law in his Summa Theologica. And basically, when it comes down to this sort of thing, he even talks about when an unjust law exists, there's an obligation, there's a duty, especially by lawmakers, to ensure that the law gets changed. Now, this is interesting, all right? And this really kind of goes to show how this sort of obviously legal philosophical sort of principle comes into play in this decision of Ramos v. Louisiana. And I think it's intriguing because, again, here we see the majority of the Supreme Court say, well, hey, yes, we need to recognize that we do make wrong decisions. The Dred Scott decision obviously being another horribly egregious decision. We can talk about how, Brown versus Board of Education overturned, over a decision that had happened roughly 60 years prior. And so the idea is that simply the justices recognize that there indeed exists the obligation to correct past wrongs, past rulings that have the effect of law, right? And as a result, they recognize that these wrongs need to be righted. And so that's an important point that we all need to come to recognize with respect to this decision, because this can play a very important role in future cases that the U.S. Supreme Court hears or even potentially has heard just within the last couple months, right? We all remember just back at the beginning of March, before the pandemic really struck, the U.S. Supreme Court heard another case from Louisiana dealing with, a pro-life law that mandated that doctors had to have admitting privileges to a local nearby hospital. This can have a profound effect on that case. And, I certainly hope that they do use this decision when reviewing this particular case. And so the potential is really, right there that needs to be decided. So this is indeed an exciting sort of time. Now, one of the things when we can talk about Roe v. Wade, one of the things that we ultimately need to understand is when we talk about abortion jurisprudence, we're talking about, it's a mess. I mean, it's truly a mess. It's not particularly consistent. U.S. Supreme Court decisions haven't been particularly consistent. They seem to constantly change, every few years about what direction it's going in and so forth. So, we have Roe as the basis, and then, roughly 20 years later, you have the Casey decision, the Planned Parenthood v. Casey decision, and that in some respects kind of modified Roe. So it wasn't really quite what it was earlier. But the simple fact is that this gives us the potential to overturn these wrongs. Because if we look at Roe, and I think all of us can agree as pro-life advocates that Roe was horribly decided. The simple fact that the U.S. Supreme Court just flat out refused to define the unborn child as a person, basically trying to pun it, saying, well, that's above our pay grade, so to speak, was a dangerous principle that it set. And certainly in effect, in many ways, it's cheapened life and certainly opened the door for many abuses, not just regarding abortion, but you can get into the issues regarding euthanasia, you can get into issues regarding in vitro fertilization, such as the creation and then destruction of embryonic children and so forth. So we can really see how Roe has caused many, many problems. And this is now a good opportunity for the justices to revisit that and to really kind of live that obligation that Thomas Aquinas really spells out in his treatise on law within the Summa, how they can take an active part in righting a past wrong, how to take part in overturning an unjust decision. Again, this is a profound time, right? In many cases, when we, again, look at Roe, it's a tragic decision. To simply say, well, we're not sure if it's a person or not, so we're going to say, ultimately say, since we can't say it is a person, we're going to say abortion is legal, really set some dangerous things in motion there, right? Not to mention the fact that, that doesn't really resolve the ultimate question. And that was something that they were supposed to do, right? But the simple fact is Roe issued in a plethora of various decisions, some good, some not so good. or I shouldn't say good, but rather some were better than. It allowed for incremental change to happen, such as parental notification laws, informed consent laws, and so forth, clinic regulation laws, and the like. But the simple truth of the matter is that, this really provides for a wonderful opportunity for us to revisit, abortion jurisprudence and be able to overturn those past wrongs. Let's face it, all right? We all certainly believe that every human life, from conception until natural death, is worth. We can't even put a price on it. It's priceless, literally. Every human life has dignity. Every human life deserves respect. It doesn't matter if that child is a 1-day-old embryo or a 1-hour-old embryo or an 80-year-old man. The simple fact is that every life deserves respect under the law. And again, I think this case is going to provide a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to revisit Roe v. Wade and the doctrine of Roe v. Wade, essentially, and have the U.S. Supreme Court overturn these decisions. And again, if there's, again, another round of epidemics or another round of the coronavirus that goes around and things have to shut down again and states have to implement orders again, again, we could see some good come out of this as well because of this decision. That certainly provides another opportunity for the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe as well. So again, let's keep up the good work. Let's keep the pressure strong. I think we are moving towards a culture of life. I think in many respects, we're seeing the Supreme Court begin to recognize this as well. And I think this was a small step towards that final sort of, I guess you could say, a goal that we're all trying to achieve, which is not only the end of Roe, but the instituting a culture of life where all life is respected and so forth. And so I think this small step even this case had nothing to do with abortion, is really a giant leap forward in seeing what the Supreme Court has a capability of doing, of righting this wrong. And again, the fact that they even mention it is just in many ways earth-shaking, and again should give us all great happiness in many respects that we're seeing the culture of life starting to break through. And again, I want to applaud all those organizations and pro-life advocates that have been pushing for pro-life laws now for almost 50 years. So, thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your patience. I know we still got a little ways to go, but we're definitely seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. Well, again, I hope you enjoyed this. Give us a big thumbs up. We always appreciate everything. And, if you have any questions, please, put them down in the comment. Give, big thumbs up again. So everyone have a wonderful weekend. God bless.